Welcome everyone. My name is Philip Gregor. I am head of responsible companies section at Frank Bold. I'm also the member of the European Corporate Reporting Collabs Steering Group, which is hosted by the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, which is a body assisting the European Commission with the financial reporting standards. Frank Bold is a leading organization in the Alliance for Corporate Transparency, whose research we are going to present to you today. Before I get to that, I'll just quickly run through the program. So if I may ask for the next slide. After the introduction, we will start the main course, which is the presentation of our research and the data on the disclosures of climate and environmental information by over 300 companies from south of Europe and east of the EU. Then we will speak a little bit about the policy context in which the reporting as well as this research is happening, and we will close with the expert commentaries from people from several business organizations, including Enel, Piraeus Bank, BBVA, as well as ASWIS, which is an Italian association, and Sustancia, a Spanish expert organization. Then the event will be closed by a short note from Elena Arveras from the European Commission, who is part of the team working on the revision of the legislation. The Alliance for Corporate Transparency, if I may ask for the next slide. The Alliance for Corporate Transparency is essentially a group of organizations that have come together to define key criteria for non-financial reporting and that have sponsored the methodology that we are using to assess companies' reporting. And the idea is to provide the impartial data to substantiate the policy discussions on the improvement of the current EU non-financial reporting framework. And this research is part of this part of this effort. As you can see, there's a number of organizations, including NGOs, as well as the reporting standard setters and initiatives. We'll speak about it more in due time. But now I'd like to tell you a little bit about the research itself. So last year, if I may ask for the next slide, please. The last year, we've analyzed 1,000 European companies on all aspects of non-financial reporting. And this year, we've analyzed additional 303 companies, of which 168 were included in our last year's research as well. But this time we focus specifically on climate-related information and some additional environmental information. We'll speak more about it in the introduction of the research. So there is some data to compare between the years, and both reports are available online at our website. So before I hand over to my colleague John Houston, who will present the results of our research, let me say a couple of words about the methodology that we have used. As you can see, we've analyzed the information in let's say according to the criteria group in 4 categories. But firstly, we look at the quality and readability of the reports based on a mix of objective and subjective criteria applied by our researchers. Then we've looked into the question whether the information are providing from a strategic perspective, and particularly when it comes to the climate, we've analyzed whether the information on the climate risks are provided from the perspective of the company's entire business model. Then the bulk of our criteria concern the type of information which is required according to the EU non-financial reporting framework, and specifically the directive. And that means information on policies, outcomes, risks, and KPIs, which we have asked specifically for climate, use of natural resources, pollution, and biodiversity questions. And for each, we've come up with a more specific content-related criteria or questions based either on the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures recommendation or some quantitative information concerning companies' climate targets and quantitative climate targets disclosures and their alignment with the public decarbonization objectives. And of course, for the KPIs, we've listed a couple of most commonly used or recommended KPIs. Finally, we ask a couple of questions concerning the disclosure by companies of their sustainable activities, products, and services, very much within the logic of the EU sustainable taxonomy. So essentially, we ask about the economic data concerning turnover or capital expenditures in this area. So that's the methodology. And with that, let me hand over to my colleague, John Houston, who will present the main findings of our research. John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Philip, and I hope you can hear me properly. Just checking. Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Philip, for the introduction. I'm EU Policy Officer at Frank Bolt, and as mentioned, what I will do this afternoon will be to summarize the key findings of the latest research conducted by the Alliance for Corporate Transparency on the climate and the environmental disclosures of 300 companies from Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe. And the first aspect to clarify, as shown on the slide at hand, is to provide further details on the scope of the research itself. So we focused on specific countries from Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe that are those mostly exposed to climate risks and with less advanced climate policies compared to other EU countries. And you can see that most companies are located specifically in Italy, Poland, followed by Spain. And we also looked into the sectors that are most exposed as well to climate risks and environmental risks. And these are outlined on the right-hand side of the slide. Now, moving from scope to the actual results, one of the criteria that we looked into, as shown on the next slide, is the location of the non-financial statement of the companies we assessed. Now, the EU Non-Financial Reporting Directive provides companies with, let's say, 3 options on where to include the non-financial statement, as outlined on the slide at hand. And you can see that, broadly speaking, most companies either included their non-financial statement in their annual report or in a separate document, with, on the other hand, lower percentages referring to the parent company reports. And a striking finding here is that we still see some companies that fail to disclose a non-financial statement, which means that they're not meeting their obligations to do so. And in terms of presentation of information, we further looked into whether companies disclose relevant KPIs, which is in fact requested for relevant issues within the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. And on top of that, we looked into how such information is presented. And what we found there is that almost 20% of companies do not publish any KPIs, which means that they're failing to meet their obligations. And only around 24% of companies report KPIs in summarized statements, which means that the other companies are scattering their KPIs throughout the report, and it means that this type of information is simply difficult to identify. Now, we also looked at whether information was reported following a clear and interconnected structure, which was the case for 23.8% of companies, with Italy and Spain performing above average compared to other companies. And what this means is that in most cases, reporting doesn't really follow a logical structure, which again gets in the way of a clear understanding of the information disclosed. And moving on to the next slide, we also looked at whether companies report on information from a strategic perspective, namely if they describe how specific sustainability risks affect their business model, strategy, and financial planning. And what we found is that companies indicated risks that may affect their business model slightly more often in relation to environmental matters than climate change, but major weaknesses were found when we observed, let's say, reporting on business opportunities related to sustainability challenges. And all of this really highlights the need for further clarifications and improvements to be made in this sense. Moving on to the next slide, you'll notice that we also looked at governance-related aspects, including how many companies, for example, disclose how sustainability issues are addressed by the board. And what is important to highlight is that, this is low, especially if compared to the broader percentage of companies that are prepared to report more general information on governance, such as corporate governance arrangements to support sustainability, which is a value which isn't shown on the slide, but lies at 35% more or less. So the way to think of this is that there's really a higher percentage of companies reporting on general governance arrangements, as opposed to those that provide more specific and insightful details, such as the criteria outlined on this slide. Now, with the next slide, you'll see summarized what could be viewed as the essence of the research, in a sense. So as mentioned by Philip, we looked into how companies report on policies, outcomes, and risks for climate and other environmental issues, as in fact requested by the directive of companies falling under the scope. And what you see here in terms of color coding is dark blue represents specific disclosures, The light blue represents, let's say, vague information provided, and the remaining orange or red percentage on the right-hand side represents lack of reporting. And the numbers on the slide refer specifically to climate change policies, outcomes, and risks. And the way to read this is that overall there is a gap between the total amount of companies that report on any of these aspects and those that, on the other hand, do so in a specific way, providing objectives and quantitative information and relevant decision useful information. And on top of that, another way to read this slide is that we still see a broad percentage of companies that simply do not report policies, outcomes, or risks at all. And a quick note to make in this sense is that while the focus of this slide is specifically on climate, the same cross-cutting trend was observed for other topics. And interestingly, this was also the case in our previous research of the 1,000 company disclosures. So that's why I'm talking about the essence of the research in a way. And the extent of the gap between these general and specific disclosures is highlighted also by the side notes that we have on the slide that show how, while approximately 31% of companies describe their policies in a specific manner, only 16% explain the alignment of their policies with science-based targets. And similarly, we also observe a big gap between the companies reporting on risks and those that use a below 2 degrees global warming scenario in their own corporate risk assessment. So these are a couple of specific examples of criteria that we looked into and that highlight these gaps between general and more specific reporting approaches. And we'll see a few more of them very shortly, but a quick note that you can also access the full list through our online database and the summarizing report that provides an overview of our findings. As mentioned by Philip, both are available online, and we do encourage you to look into these for further details. Now, the next slide shows further details on how companies reported on policies and includes a breakdown for some of the countries that we included in the study. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is really to give you an idea and a sense of noticeable cross-country differences that emerge between companies reporting or not reporting any policies and the details included in these policies. As also does the following graph provide this cross-country, this differentiation, where instead the focus is on the outcomes of policies. And one quick note I would like to make here is that fewer companies report on the outcomes of the policies as opposed to the policies as such, which is an important finding since outcomes are really what provide us with a benchmark and an indication of how companies are performing against their own objectives. So again, this is a very important finding. And moving on to the next slide, you can see some of the specific criteria I was mentioning that we assessed when looking into climate policies, including, for example, climate targets. And by that, we mean quantitative targets linked to climate change mitigation or adaptation. And also, for example, their alignment with the Paris Agreement, whose reporting is really necessary for an understanding of a company's decarbonization plans and alignment with international objectives. But as seen a few slides ago, reporting on this is still very low compared to general approaches and doesn't allow readers to have an understanding of what such plans for companies are. Again, the next slide also provides a breakdown of risk-related reporting for different countries. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is just to give you a very quick overview of what these differences might be. And moving on to the next slide, we have a summary of the more specific risk-related criteria that we assessed. And these are derived from the European Commission guidelines on climate-related reporting, which in turn integrate the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And an interesting finding in this sense is provided by, let's see, the first criteria outlined in the slide and the second last one. So in other words, the percentage of companies reporting firstly on risks and opportunities provided for each time horizon. And secondly, also the risk assessment based on a below 2 degrees climate scenario. And the reason why I'd like to focus on the attention on these results is that companies can describe risks in a very thorough manner and very specifically, but if that information is not placed within the context of EU decarbonization timelines and the company's own pathway to carbon neutrality, then simply we have critical information missing. And on average here, you can see while we had 32% of companies describing specific risks, again, less than 9% report on these very two important criteria. And as shown on the next slide, we also assessed whether companies from the financial sector report on indicators suggested by, let's say, the European Commission's translation of the Tcfd recommendations into the EU guidelines. And what we found is that very few companies report on these indicators. And we have a slightly higher percentage in Greece. A quick explanation is due to the fact that we had a low amount of companies from the financial sector and included in the research, which skewed this result. And the reason why these results are particularly important, or the reason why such a lack of reporting on these aspects is critical, is given by the fact that the financial sector plays a critical role in financing and supporting the climate transition. So definitely improvements are needed in this sense. And in line with the EU Non-Financial Reporting Directive, if we move to the next slide, companies are meant to report on relevant KPIs. And these numbers provide a summary of the extent to which companies that we assessed do so. And broadly speaking, there are, let's say, fairly high levels of reporting on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, with, however, again, noticeable regional differences, with Italy and Spain, for example, performing above average compared to other countries. But we did observe, broadly speaking, lower numbers both on Scope 3 emissions and emission intensity. So again, an important finding that we identified. Now, on top of climate, as we can see in the slide, we wanted to share some results relating to corporate reporting on other environmental issues. And I won't repeat what Philip mentioned earlier, but what you can see here is that 70% of companies report no information at all on biodiversity, which, however, is not particularly surprising given the lack of clarity on how to report on such an aspect. On top of that, while more than half of the companies report on the use of water, which is actually one of the most commonly used KPIs when it comes to the use of natural resources, we found that less than 10% of these same companies put that information into context by reporting on risks to local water stress, which undermines the relevance of simply reporting on water use without providing details on the context. And lastly, confirming again these gaps between general and specific reporting practices is there's a difference between reporting on pollution-related policies. So we have more than half of companies that are currently doing so, but with a much lower 7% of companies that report quantitative pollution reduction targets. Now, the next slide provides a very quick snapshot of reporting on sustainable products and services. And by that, we don't mean CSR activities, but we really mean beyond simple CSR activities. We see that only 1 in 4 companies provide information on capital expenditure for climate change mitigation and adaptation. And an even lower amount of companies, so only 1 in 20, report on related turnover, both of which are criteria that companies falling under the scope of the EU Non-Financial Reporting Directive will need to start reporting on in line with the EU taxonomy. So to ensure alignment with these requirements, a lot of work is still needed. Now, I'd like to mention a few words about the cross-regional differences in the results that we identified. And we have this and the following slide that we can jump in between while I provide an explanation. Now, the countries in which the companies we assessed are located can be grouped in 3 categories. And a first group of more advanced Mediterranean countries, including Spain, Italy, and Greece. Another group of Eastern countries, which includes Poland, Croatia, Slovenia, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, that however show, let's say, worse results than the previous group, but still have a relevant minority of companies that does ultimately provide some level of specific information. And lastly, a small and third group of countries where instead we didn't identify any examples of relevant or sufficient disclosure. And these include Bulgaria, Hungary, and Slovenia. And one critical finding that I'd like to highlight is that while the first group of, let's say, Mediterranean countries do perform better than the other 2 groups, the share of companies providing specific information on policies, risks, and targets, even within this advanced group, let's say, fluctuates between 25 and 55%, which on the other hand means that there's, at least in the best of cases, there's half of the companies that simply do not provide specific information. So highlighting the need for improvements in this sense as well. And then one very quick maybe takeaway, focusing on the slide that we're seeing right now, is also that we have relatively good, let's say, reporting on policies, but then that becomes worse when we look at risks or forward-looking targets, where the percentages of reporting fall. Now, there is one final level of analysis I'd like to summarize, as we can see on the slide. Thank you very much. And that is changes over time. So of the 300 companies assessed this year, as Philip mentioned earlier on, 168 companies were included in our previous assessment of 1,000 company reports, which importantly allows that we can make comparisons. And overall, we identified an increase in reporting on climate targets, and to an extent also on specific information relating to policies. However, an important note is that most of these changes are specific to Spain only, which is also most likely explained by legislative changes and requirements in Spain as such. And also such specific information is still only limited to a minority of companies. And lastly, although we didn't really address environmental due diligence as comprehensively as we, for example, did in our previous research on human rights due diligence, and this was due to the fact that questions on the application of environmental due diligence are not really fully settled, we did look into some criteria, and these suggest that, broadly speaking, there are no improvements in terms of environmental due diligence. So this is something, of course, to keep into account. So this leads me to the last slide of the presentation with an overview of conclusions. And there are plenty to be made thanks to the data that you can access online through our report and the database, which, by the way, is interactive, so you can filter results by country or by sector, depending on what you might be most interested in. But based on today's presentation, some conclusions can be drawn. And the first is that, we need standards for the quality of information to ensure ultimately that we have specific forward-looking and decision-useful information on policies, outcomes, and risks. Another issue is that we've identified methodological issues which gets in the way of data comparability. As I mentioned earlier, there's low levels of reporting on Scope 3, and there's various reasons associated with this, but there's no alignment on definitions of Scope 3, let alone methodologies. On top of that, we need the directive to clarify what needs to be reported in terms of company decarbonization plans. So we saw earlier that current reporting practices simply do not allow readers to understand what such plans for companies are. And another issue, as I mentioned, we have around 70% of companies do not report on biodiversity. Or there's very few companies that report on the use of specific details of natural resources, which calls for definition of methodologies, metrics, and specific thresholds above which these issues should be reported. And lastly, we really need supervisors to specify and enforce minimum expectations for the implementation of the existing legislative requirements. And this relates to the fact that we identified cases of no reporting basic information for climate risks, policies, outcomes, and KPIs from critical sectors when it comes to climate change mitigation and adaptation. And these are companies and sectors that are highly exposed to major risks. So improvements are needed in this sense too as well. So I've concluded here the presentation. I believe some questions have come in throughout the presentation, and if you have further questions, you can keep sending them via the chat or reach out to us via email, and we'll make sure to get back to you either today during the call or at a later stage. But I'll hand over to Philip for the next part of the of today's meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. So we will be sharing the presentation, and all the data is available online. We haven't benchmarked companies, we are not comparing them, but their results are also available in the database, so they can check. And all the results were actually sent to the companies, and quite a few of them provided feedback to us before we presented the results. Now, we've shown you a lot of data, a lot of data on the data that companies disclose. And of course, the question is, what is the data good for? And we'll have a panel of esteemed experts from the business environment to speak about it. But before we get there, it's important to recap what is the current policy environment and policy developments in which this discussion is taking place. And I'll be joined for this by Axel Blanchard from the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, Policy Manager at the Tcfd, and Carlos Tornero from the Responsible Investor. And for those of you who are not reading Responsible Investors, you really should if you are interested in sustainable finance and sustainability disclosures. But first, to you, let me turn to you, Axel. So the CDSB is among the top 5 reporting standard setters and initiatives, and CDSB is very actively engaged in these policy discussions at the EU level. So and at the same time, you are yourself analyzing companies' disclosures, and you have a very precise ideas on as to which information on climate is critical. So I was wondering, what are your reactions to these results and how they correspond to your latest findings, and what are the problems that you think that companies and investors are facing in this regard?
Many thanks, Philip. Good afternoon, everyone. And many thanks to the Alliance for Corporate Transparency for inviting CDSB at this event and for your kind introduction. Maybe just, well, you already presented CDSB. I'll just add a couple more elements. So the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, we are a consortium of 9 business and environmental NGOs founded back in 2007 at the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos. And our mission is to provide decision-useful environmental information to markets via the integration of such information into the annual reports of businesses. We provide for that a framework, the CDSB framework, with some guiding principles and reporting requirements, so really the how and what to report. So indeed, the topic of today's event is very close to our heart and mission. I must say that we are proud members of the Alliance for Corporate Transparency. And as you rightly mentioned, we also perform a similar analysis of the ESG information provided by European large undertakings in order also to help policymakers in the development of ambitious policy tools and framework. And as you mentioned, we'll be launching our latest report next week. I think the overall message I take from reading the Alliance research, and as Joanne just presents the findings to all of us, is that companies are not there yet. And that's exactly what we found from our side, with really a mixed pictures, with some signs of improvement in the disclosures, but clearly remaining challenges in providing that decision useful information, answering the needs of various stakeholders. I think there are many findings that I could have chosen to comment on today. I've chosen 2 in the interest of time, and also I think these 2 examples are really making the case for really understanding non-financial reporting as a meaningful exercise from a strategic business perspective. So I wanted first to mention risk disclosure and the implementation of the TCFD recommendations that Joanne highlighted in her presentation. Both our analyses show really a lack of meaningful disclosures of principal risk, with companies not able to provide business-specific disclosures of integrate, identify risk into risk management processes. And the result is also linked to a lack of implementation of the TCFD recommendations, especially when it comes to disclosing forward-looking information and using scenario analysis to really assess the resilience of the company against specific climate scenarios. And our analysis showed in that regard that companies are less likely to disclose business model impacts, so really related to how the business generates value at a more strategic level. And the Alliance finding also show that a minority of companies are actually mentioning risk to their business model related to climate change. I think also the TCFD recommendation is a lot about governance, and on that front, the Alliance research and our study as well show a lack of disclosure of board, but also management responsibility and accountability over climate and environmental issues. So that was my first choice on the Alliance findings. I also wanted to touch upon KPIs and targets, which are definitely very useful tools to really measure the performance of the business and how seriously it's taken into account climate change and other environmental issues. I think it's a very interesting example from the Alliance research. We see clearly challenges when it comes to disclosing scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. And I think I found the assessment of the proportion of company providing disclosure on green turnover or green capex very interesting in the context of the current finalization of taxonomy-related disclosure requirements. We have also noticed that a lot of companies are actually not able to provide these climate-related financial KPIs that can connect their financial performance with environmental and climate-related issues. And we also share your conclusions around the need to have consistency in the formats and summarized overview of such KPIs, as well as connecting them with policies, outcomes, but also specific targets, really in order to provide that integrated picture of the direction of travel the company intends to take to manage environmental risks and impacts. So if I can conclude, and I hope I'm not taking too much time here, overall, both the Alliance findings and our own research provide clearly further evidence of the need to review the non-financial reporting directive. And as a result, we can hope that company will be able to understand and disclose the relevant data that can meet at least 3 different needs. So the need for consistent, comparable, and decision-useful information answering the needs of various audience and stakeholders, the need to increase sustainable investment and transparency around such investment for the EU to meet the Paris Agreement and the climate law objective. I think we just heard that the EU is on track to meet the 2020 targets, but there's a long way to go towards climate neutrality, and finally, the need for stakeholders and including investors to comply with their own disclosure requirements coming from other regulation like the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. So I think I'll stop there. Thanks again for the opportunity to comment on the Alliance findings, coming of course at a very timely moment ahead of new Sustainable Finance initiative coming up. Over to you, Philippe.
Thank you, Axel. And indeed, your research is focused on the largest undertakings in Europe. So in terms of geographies, I mean, our researches are highly complementary. There's not so much overlap in terms of the geographies. But you've mentioned what's going on at the EU level. And for this, I'd like to turn to Carlos Tornero. So I'll just repeat again that people who are not reading Carlos's articles, they should, because they provide a lot of useful insights. And Carlos, you must understand quite well the challenges and pitfalls of this discussion. So we wanted to ask you for a little bit of a short strategic analysis of what's happening at the EU level and what are the, let's say, most interesting things from your perspective.
Thanks a lot, Philip. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for the praise, right? Happy to see that we have good readers in Brussels, but elsewhere. So yeah, basically, I see 3 challenges that the European Commission is trying to tackle. The first one is lack of leadership, right, to solve this issue. Until February this year, possibly, no one has said, okay, let's fix it, right? So in the absence of, perhaps the SEC or the IFRS Foundation or whoever you want to think of, the European Commission is, in a way, blazing a trail here, right? One that perhaps could have been explored earlier, but in any case, earlier than anyone else. And the second challenge that the European Commission, I think, or at policy level, is being tackled is overcoming voluntary approaches to this problem that simply don't work. So far, non-financial reporting has relied on what we all call the alphabet soup, right? This range of voluntary standards, metrics, frameworks, and the alphabet soup has served a purpose, but now I think there is appetite for something new. And the third challenge that connects with this second point is the potential harmonization of the reporting landscape, right? With potential mandatory standards made in Europe and using the existing ingredients of the alphabet soup. But we don't know yet what's going to be the course of action, right? Let's see what comes up from the EFRAG work and what the European Commission decides. So let me elaborate just a bit on these 3 points regarding leadership. You might remember back in February this year that the European Commission was announcing that the NFRD revision might involve setting standards as well. But at the same time, the SEC was announcing the modernization of disclosure rules, right? Their regulation, the SK rules, right? And surprisingly, that didn't cover climate change risks. So I think that that's telling, right? In terms of leadership, you couldn't count on the states, and that was the tone at the top, during the Trump administration. You can think as well of the IFRS Foundation, right? What about them? And they have been missing opportunities for a long time. BlackRock has been saying, at least since 2016, that they want, and I quote here, standardized ESG disclosure within a consistent global reporting framework, and the critical bit, similar to international accounting standards. So, who is better placed than the IFRS Foundation to do that? And other investors have been, making more explicit statements around the same idea, right? The IFRS Foundation taking a more proactive role, and it's worth remembering that until very recently, maybe 3 years ago, the only ambition of the IFRS Foundation and the IASB was to update the voluntary guidance on narrative reporting, this practice statement management commentary project. Now the IFRS has finally issued a consultation on the role it should play on sustainability reporting, with the proposal for a sustainability standards board as well, which is great. But I guess the European Commission just couldn't wait for to see what comes out from this consultation, because the NFRD is the pillar of the Green Deal and on the whole sustainability, the sustainable finance agenda as a whole. So and don't get me wrong, the ISB and the IFRS Foundation have a lot on their plate, but so does the European Commission, right? So talking of leadership, I think that's a valid point to make. And the second point about the business case for mandatory approaches, the NFRD was a pioneering law, introducing new obligations on what we can agree that can be called ESG issues, but it didn't it didn't say how to comply with those new obligations. Allowed flexibility to do so, and your study, the study that the Alliance is launching today, and previous ones by Frank Ball, provide evidence that this is the wrong approach, and there are shortcomings. So I guess the European Commission and policymakers in general wouldn't like to make the same mistake again, right? So it's true that sustainability reporting has changed dramatically since the NFRD was passed, and during the last 5 years, the alphabet soup has already evolved. So that the alphabet soup leads me to the third point and last point, which is a standard setting being part of the legislative work. We tend to think that this area is technical, it's boring, and it could be, but I think it's quite political, with a lot of spice sometimes, and with a lot of interest at stake. And we've seen quite recently, right? Many organizations coming together to harmonize their own projects. I'm thinking of SASB, GRI, CDP, CDSB, and IARC. Even more recently, SASB and IARC are going to merge next year. So I don't think this is an accident, and I guess they want to be part of the potential European standards. This is a kind of I don't know, if, the equivalent to the seduction dance in the animal kingdom. So I think that's going to be very interesting, the standard setting space, and I guess one of the crucial things to bear in mind is double materiality. All of them lack this approach that the European Commission, I think, has in mind for that. But I won't touch upon this topic, because I guess many other speakers will have things more informed things to say about it than myself. So that's the three challenges that I think we can watch.
Thank you, Carlos. One thing just to summarize is that, and I'm not sure if you have said it clearly, the European Commission is going to propose a new version of the Union financial reporting legislation coming March, and there's this commitment or interest in introducing mandatory reporting standards. Elena Arveras from the European Commission will brief us at the end of the event, but that's just the context. And the second part is that the amount of finances that are starting to move towards sustainability and climate, the amount of them is staggering. Just a couple of years ago, there was an estimate that to meet European Union's 2030 climate targets would require additional 180 billion euro of investment or reallocation of private and public investment. Is itself, huge, but now we're speaking about the amounts of in a different magnitude. So suddenly the non-financial reporting is becoming, in a way, very, very relevant for, let's say, financial planning. But in the interest of time, we need to move to the reflections by our esteemed panel, starting with Giulia Genuardi from Enel, which is, of course, as most of you would know, a major Italian energy company. And Giulia is also a member of the EFRAG's Project Task Force on Non-Financial Reporting Standards that we have mentioned earlier. So Giulia, if I may turn to you as the head of the Sustainability Planning and Performance Management at Enel, what role sustainability data play in your business strategy as an energy company, and why?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this kind of meeting, because it's really, really important to reflect and share the different view about that. So you can read in the title of my unit, that is Sustainability Planning and Performance Management, exactly because we are strongly convinced that the sustainability data are an element to plan our activities. So, for example, we have presented the last industrial plan, strategic plan, in which you can see exactly the merge between sustainability and the financial world. So, if we can see this kind of thing, but I think in two words, that sustainability data and non-financial data are fundamental to really understand the business model of a company. So in this moment, it's not an exception. It's exactly the backbone and the baseline and the starting point to evaluate a company. At the same time, it's really, really important to understand that the company has many, many relations with different stakeholders. And so the different stakeholders want different data. In this world, it's really important to understand that it's not so simple to reach all the needs of the different stakeholders. So I think that a structured corporate reporting framework is absolutely necessary. So we have a financial report, we have a sustainability report that normally try to catch and reach different stakeholders. And so I think that we have to respect this kind of differences and this kind of need, because both with the financial report and both with the sustainability report, sorry, I prefer to call sustainability report and not non-financial, because sometimes it seems something that is contrast with the other. It's not true. Are complementary, are at the same level, and are important to reduce the risk of the company, not only reputational risk, but also operational risk of the company. I think that in this moment, for this reason, so data are fundamental, and the identification of stakeholders are also fundamental to identify the data that I have to publish. For this reason, the element that is in common is exactly the materiality assessment. So I think that materiality is the main process. Seems to be a navigator to identify that data and to identify the stakeholder needs. But the materiality that we have to address is a dynamic materiality, because the context in which the company operates change continuously. So it's necessary that also our materiality assessment changing. And also for us, it's really important, a concept of double materiality. I give you a brief example. So if we manage energy transition, it's absolutely necessary that we manage also the just transition. So we have to consider the impact of the world on the company, but it's absolutely necessary to consider the impact of the company on the environment, on the collectivity, on the community. So it's true what some colleagues said before. We are in a moment in which where we have an alphabetical soup, but I think at the same time that we have big ambition and big challenge. we have really to define this kind of data, and we have to start to use in a common way this kind of data, because we know very well that the different actors use different definition of sustainability. So it's necessary that we are transparent on the definition of sustainability, and we give, I don't know if it's possible to give a unique definition of sustainability, a single definition of sustainability, but I think that it's necessary that we are more transparent about that. For example, if you consider ESG rating agencies, is exactly the topic and the challenge that we have. Different ESG raters use different sustainability definition and prepare and define different evaluation of the company.
Thank you, Julia. And so, in this context, and given the challenges that you see, how do you think that the reform of the EU non-financial reporting directives and the potential development of the EU standards can help companies? And just we are reflecting on this question from the perspective that our data show that companies in south of Europe are improving, but not fast enough, and still only a minority provide useful data.
I think that non-financial directive is really useful because through the non-financial directive, we can create the backbone of the information that it's necessary to have. And it's also useful for stakeholders to evaluate the performance of the company, but it's also useful for the company to collect and aggregate the information of their supply chain that are normally SMEs companies. But at the same time, we have to guarantee a correct balance between the backbone on information and the materiality of information for the company. Because it's normal that all companies, each company is completely different respect to the other. So it's necessary that we have a backbone of information to guarantee comparability. But it's also important to enforce or reinforce the role of materiality in terms of dynamic to reach new innovative topics that in this moment are not covered by the non-financial directive, and probably we will have new topics in the next future. And also, it's also important, the materiality, to identify the specific element for specific sectors and company.
So it must be a combination. Companies
Yes.
need to know what to do about the materiality determination, and there needs to be some kind of backbone of key environmental data, which is critical for everyone. Okay, thank you. Very clear. Thank you very much. Good luck in the project task force, and we're looking forward to the output of the project task force. And with that, let me move to the next speaker. Thank you. Sorry, Julia. Let me move to the next speaker, who's Dimitrios Dimopoulos, who's the Director of Sustainability Unit at Piraeus Bank. Now, the Piraeus Bank came out very, very strongly out of our research, including when it comes to reporting on the indicators concerning the exposure of financial institutions to climate risks through the investments and lending and so on and so forth. And very, very few banks have done it in the countries we have examined. But this perhaps does not necessarily come as a surprise, given the fact that Dimitrios, your bank is one of the members of the UNEP-FI and also a founding member of the Principles for Responsible Banking, working on the targets for the banking industry. But tell us, what is your strategy with respect to climate transition, and what data is critical for you in this regard? What is it that you need as a bank?
Philip, thank you very much, and thank for the question. Thank you very much for the invitation. Piraeus Bank has a long history in sustainability, going back in the early 2000s. It was the first bank, actually, Piraeus Bank is the largest bank in Greece, and it was the first bank that actually introduced green loans. It's the first bank in Greece that recently came out with the first sustainability-linked loan. Back in 2012, we implemented an EU LIFE project, and through this project, we developed a tool to measure and to estimate the impact of climate change on our clients, on companies within Greece. And it's something that we are now moving on to very fast, having committed to the Science-Based Target Initiative we're working on a baseline for our financed emissions within 2021. So we'll be able by the end of next year to have a baseline and to track progress in how we will decarbonize our portfolio. Having said that, I really want to stress the fact that climate risk in the bank is gaining a big traction. We're working very closely with the risk department, having validated the tool and trying to introduce, if I could say so, a climate risk culture in all functions of the bank. And this is the reason why we responded to the call back about 2 years ago to join a small group, about 30 banks from all over the world, as members of UNIPIFY to create the principles for responsible banking. And currently we're at the stage of developing across the board goals and targets so that we can meet the Paris Climate Agreement and the targets of the Paris Climate Agreement and the SDGs. Now, that's just a little bit of a background of where we stand as a bank at the moment. But what I would like to stress now is the issue of data, and that's an issue that we are dealing with collectively as members of UNIPIFY. There's about 200 banks that have signed the principles at the moment, and one of the biggest issues that we face, and this refers to big banks, large banks, smaller banks, banks that have a progress and a background in sustainability, and banks that are just starting now on their journey. The issue of data and you can basically say that the issue has two prongs. One is the external prong, and the other one's the internal prong. The external prong is how do I get the right data, the data from our customers, from our clients, data that can feed into the information that we need so that we can run our assessments on climate risk and try to set targets. So having clients reporting and reporting the right data, the quality data at the level that is required, that fits the purpose is one issue. Then the second prong is the internal issue, because in some cases the granularity of the data is not there, and there hasn't been or the sustainability tagging, I would say, is not up to scratch, so that we can easily get the data that we need to analyze it. That puts a lot of pressure on IT systems. And now with the EU taxonomy, things are going to get a little bit tougher, because we'll need to be able to define green ratios and classify our portfolio according to the EU taxonomy, which will be a very, very fundamental tool in addressing sustainable financing. And I like to stress a bit the issue with SMEs, because we're basically an SME bank, and SMEs represent about 99% of all businesses in Europe. There's 23 million SMEs in Europe, and they represent 60% of the total value of the economy. And we know that most SMEs do not have the resources to provide that information. So it's very, very important that we develop approaches that will allow SMEs to report at least the basic and fundamental information and data that we need. So as banks, we can draw the results, make it, and be able to analyze all the data that we need to measure the impact of climate. And having said that, data is one issue, and the other issue is also methodologies, because you might have the data, but if you don't have methodologies for the analysis of this data and methodologies that can help banks develop climate scenarios and set targets according to the Paris Agreement, is also another issue. So standardizing methodologies is something that we find as a challenge as banks, and it's something that we are working together as peers in UNIPIFY to develop methodologies on climate and biodiversity risks. So that's roughly what I'd like to talk about regarding data and methodologies.
Excellent. I suppose we can spend several hours discussing details of what this all means. But let me just recap my notes of what you have said. You've highlighted the importance of the strategy and, let's say, governance of these matters. So this is something where there is a need for more action. And then when it comes to the issue of data, one concerns the data from the clients, especially SMEs, and how to make it possible for them to report, how to clarify, how to make it, how to allow them actually to report on these issues. And a more overarching point is on the methodologies in this regard, especially if I understood it correctly, with regard to the risk assessment and so on and so forth. Now, with respect to these areas of priority, if I may put it that way, where do you see the added value of the European standards? How they can help with these issues? And of course, they can't solve all the problems, but what is it that they could focus on?
Well, standardized data is something I think is very, very important, because it will allow us to compare, and it will definitely help in being more transparent and accountable. So I think that what is happening now in the EU, and what the ECB is doing, and the European Banking Authority on developing comprehensive technical standards to implement disclosure requirements for climate risk, are also very, very, very important. And when you combine the standards for data with the standardized methodologies, then we can probably see progress in this field of reporting, which is not only a question of reporting, it's also a question of understanding and seeing and realizing where your impacts are, and putting emphasis on your positive impacts, and trying to reduce your negative impacts, and setting the right and ambitious targets. So that's why I think that standards are very, very important. And to finish on that, I would like to say that probably an EU central data register would be very, very important, especially if it's based on common standards, so that banks can have access, especially information regarding SMEs, as I said before.
Excellent. Well, no pressure on the European Commission, it seems. Thank you very much. We need to move to the next segment, as the next speaker, and good luck with the development of the methodologies. They are much needed. So let me turn to Juanjo Cordero now, who's a partner in Sustancia, which is an expert organization with vast experience in terms of analyzing company sustainability disclosures. Juanjo and his colleagues at Sustancia have started this in 2004 with their first analysis of IBEX 35 companies. So there are very few people, at least in the Spanish context, who would know about the developments over the time and persistent gaps. So, and I should also mention that Sustancia is a partner of the Alliance for Corporate Transparency, and has taken a great deal of work on its shoulders in our initial analysis of 1,000 companies last year. So, Juanjo, if I may ask, in which areas do you see improvements, and in which areas less so, and why do you think we see these developments?
Hello, thank you, Philippe, for the invitation. Yes, okay, let me start talking a bit about the main gap that we still see year after year in these kind of assessments on non-financial reporting. What we find is that a risk management approach is missing somehow. So as the guiding principles on business and human rights set out, the due diligence approach, it should be applied also in the whole managing the information on non-financial reporting. So taking that in consideration, the starting point should be the identification of risks. This is the most important phase on non-financial reporting, I think, because this, from there, once the risks are identified with this double materiality that we already, somebody else mentioned in this session, with double perspective of risks the company and for the environment and people. Once this is identified, the commitments, the policy commitments, the goals, the targets, and the actions taken, all that have a meaning, because otherwise, and this is something the report shows, there's a lot of companies that they commit, they have policies, but they have not identified risk. So it's very difficult that these commitments have a practical use, you know, because they are not linked to a specific risk. So the idea is that the information companies provide, it's how they are managing those risks that have identified, how they manage, what is their commitment, and what are the results they obtain out of the actions and the planning they have. And this is something that we find year after year, which is missed. Also, the information sometimes on risk, it seems to be not written by the same department or something. It usually is in a separate section on of the report and is not connecting to the rest of the information. So sometimes for us, we have the feeling that it's not a lack of will of transparency, but it's a lack of understanding of what is the goal of non-financial reporting on this. And yeah, about the performance, I think we find, especially in Spanish companies, that they have performed much better than last year, at least on climate-related information in policies and risk descriptions and outcomes, and they're well above the rest of the countries in several indicators. But to put this in context, let's say that we have in the Spanish legislation, we have some specific requirements on that. So KPIs on greenhouse gas emissions, it's required, and not all companies are fulfilling these requirements. And the same thing happens with targets. No, we have a very good results from Spanish companies. It's about 50% of the companies, but the legislation, Spanish legislation, requires that those information on those targets. So it depends on how you see it. It is you can see it as a very optimistic perspective. Spain is doing much better because we also see very good improvements on information related to science-based targets. Last year we were below 15%, and this year it's above 40%. So that's quite impressive. I don't think these results can be extrapolated to all the Spanish companies, but anyhow, it's those results are very good, and I think they show there's a good trend, and on the Spanish companies reporting on these issues. Just to summarize and to finish, I think Spanish, it's a good Spanish example. Is very good to see that what it is stated at regulations has an effect on the reports published by the companies. So legal requirements, there are not all of companies, but there is a big number of companies that they follow and they provide information. But if these legal requirements are not specific, what we find also is vague and sometimes useless information. So yeah, what we see is that somehow there should be oversight bodies or system of sanction or something that also helps to enforce this law. No? And I think this is like for a general comment.
Thank you, Juanjo. So it seems that every coin has two sides. I mean, there is the Spain provides a good example that intervention on the part of policymakers can really focus companies on the right data and help them to understand. But Probably needs to be done in terms of the supervision to really get over the 50% at least threshold. And I also noted down what you said about the purpose, understanding of the purpose of reporting of the risks. That seems to me like a call for essentially a quality criteria for reporting, which seems to be missing in the current framework, European and national legislative framework. But let me ask one quick follow-up question. We don't have much time, so if you can be brief, that would be appreciated. What's your take on reporting on supply chains metrics? Because we haven't really addressed it in detail this time around, except of, let's say, scope 3 reporting. But do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, well, actually, that question is quite complex, but just a general comment on that. What we see is that there is a general lack of information about risk and impacts on value changes, and taking in consideration that business models nowadays are based on strategies of offshoring and outsourcing of their value changes. Most of risk and impacts are located in suppliers and subcontractors in this value chain. So the results also in this report are very disappointing, I would say, because yeah, we have that KPI on scope 3, but we also have some other indicators like engagement with the value chain to reduce impacts with for use of natural resources, polluting discharges, and biodiversity. It's around 2% of companies also only, and indication of location critical to value chain, it's only 1% of companies are providing that kind of information. So yeah, the general comment will be that it is very, very important, it's a must, that the due diligence include risk and impacts in suppliers and subcontractors.
And this is a problem from the perspective of the European Green Deal and its objectives to decouple the growth in Europe from the use of natural resources. I mean, if we simply outsource the problems, then it might look good on paper, but
Exactly.
kind of missing the point. So that might be also a valuable input for the EU processes. Thank you, Joaquim.
Thank you.
Then we move to the next speaker, who is Giulio Lalacono, who is the manager of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development. And Giulio, apologies for not trying to pronounce the name of your alliance in Italian. I will probably butcher it. So
yes, no problem. It's ASVIS anyway.
But let me only say that you are a formidable institution because you bring together over 270 organizations, various NGOs representing different stakeholders, business and NGO, and let's say civil society alike. And you have also carried out a critical analysis of disclosures in this area. And the question I would have for you is that the results of the Spanish and Italian companies have shown progress on the especially on the science-based targets, and in Italian case on the specificity of risk disclosures. But specifically in Italy, there is a gap between reporting on risks and the clarity of actions taken to mitigate these risks. It's a really, really strange thing, which is well, it's present everywhere, but in Italy it's much more profound than elsewhere. So what's your reading of the situation? And more generally, how do you think that reporting can drive sustainable development?
Thank you, Philip. Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I think that this gap is partially due to the fact that a real evaluation of ESG risk started quite recently, when the non-financial reporting became mandatory for many companies, both in terms of suffered risks and also generated risks. Even though climate and environmental matters in terms of performances and risks are easier to measure than social ones, we still lack a general coherence between identified risks and concrete actions taken to mitigate these risks. Of course, there are a lot of reasons. For example, sustainability risks are often more challenging to quantify than traditional risks. I mean, once a sustainability risk has been identified, it can be very challenging to quantify the impact of the risk during the assessment phase. Risks are often evaluated and understood on the basis of historical analysis. When a risk is still emerging, it can be difficult to find a tool to support quantification. And in addition, the tools that are familiar to risk professionals, such as decision trees, Monte Carlo, stress testing, and so on, are not as well understood always by sustainability managers. And still, there is, in many cases, a lack of cooperation, a lack of collaboration between sustainability and enterprise risk functions. Even when risk and sustainability functions are communicating, if sustainability is not speaking the risk language and vice versa, sustainability risks may be ignored without any mitigation plan to be implemented. And moreover, the current risk management frameworks do not provide enough guidance to companies to manage sustainability risks, also according to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And when managing more traditional risks, commodity risk, credit risk, market risk, and so on, companies have developed a significant capability over time to quantify the impacts and then apply the know-how of business managers and risk managers to make a call. For emerging sustainability risks, business managers often do not have the tools to implement and mitigate the assessed environmental risk. And finally, the outlook, the timeline. The sustainability risk timeline is longer than that of traditional risks. And time horizon is another reason why sustainability risks are often overlooked or prioritized lower than other risks. The timelines considered during a risk assessment for most companies were 2 or 5 years. Some companies use a time horizon of 10 years, 5 or 10 years, especially in sectors that have longer investment time horizons. In contrast, sustainability materiality assessments typically look at a time horizon of 10, 12, or 30 years. And for so many companies, especially during this coronavirus crisis, it's very difficult to have this kind of long-term perspective.
Understood. Thank you. And I should add one figure that's also specific to Italy, and that Italian companies prefer, at least those included in our research, prefer to provide information in a separate report, rather than fully integrated in the annual report, and that may be a symptom of some of the issues or challenges that you have mentioned. But my follow-up question to you would be, what would you recommend the EU reform to address in order to achieve better, let's say, guidance for companies, to help companies to overcome some of these challenges, or perhaps provide a clear benchmark to the users of the information? But I understand that the company's perspective is the one that you can address.
I think that this crisis coming from the pandemic showed us that more resilient companies, more sustainable companies are often less vulnerable to systematic risks and more resilient to shocks. But we know that small, medium enterprises are the backbone of Europe's economy. They represent, they employ around 100 million people, account for more than half of Europe's GDP, and play a key role. Also in Italy, SMEs account for like 92% of the companies. But we also know that for them it's more difficult to evaluate their own environmental and social impact. It's hard for them to have a sustainability function, and this is why European Union should consider SMEs in the effort towards a more sustainable and resilient system. We need a much more simplified approach. SMEs often commit themselves to an ESG disclosure just if they are suppliers of bigger companies, or if they want to access sustainable finance investments. But this is not enough. In Italy, our organization, ASVIS, the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, asks that the legislative decree, which makes non-financial reporting mandatory for just over 200 very large companies, should be reviewed. Today, 4 years after publication of this decree, the business community has fully realized that non-financial reporting is a vital tool for enabling individual companies to access the most dynamic form of finance, which is responsible finance, and that adoption of sustainability-oriented management practices allows not only for significant cost reductions, but also for productivity gains. Therefore, it is time to immediately make non-financial reporting mandatory for all large companies, and also gradually for medium-sized companies. A recent survey conducted by the Italian Forum for Sustainable Finance showed that coronavirus crisis caused a loss of market shares in 45% of the SMEs and a dramatic loss of sales in 23% of the companies. Furthermore, 1 company in 3 believes that integrating sustainability in the criteria that drive strategic choices will help a faster recovery once the current crisis is over.
Thank you, Giulio. So the message on personal scope is very clear, as well as the reasons for that. And I'm also reading from or hearing what you're saying that the one advantage or one objective for the EU reforms should be to place a clear focus and help companies to understand what data is really kind of the backbone, if I may use Julia's earlier comments. I mean, if you just throw, for example, global reporting initiative standards on a SME, they will probably have a hard time finding their way around it. Anyways, thank you very much. Let us move to the last contributor before we actually conclude with a short remarks from Elena Arveras from DG FISMA of the European Commission. So we're running a little bit of time, so we'll be probably some 5-6 minutes late behind the end of the meeting. But we'll get to it in a second. So Ricardo, if I can turn to you as a representative of the BBVA, one of the major banks in Spain and globally, and in your position as a managing director and head of the Global Sustainability Office, you told me before the call that you are a highly wanted person these days in so many fora, which only speaks to the importance of sustainability in the nowadays economy. But the question that I would like to ask you is that since the results of our research have shown an increase in the acknowledgement and identification of risks in climate and environmental matters, doesn't seem to be translated into companies disclosing what they are doing about those risks. So it's a kind of a small question we have just addressed. But the question to you is, what does it mean for a bank like BBVA? How do you work with that?
Thank you, Philippe. Thank you from both team for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here and to speak about sustainability. How financial institutions is trying to integrate this major trend into our current operations. Because society is about this. No? It's not about high-level declaration. It's not about just a pure regulatory work, but to integrate sustainability into our strategy, operation, and daily business. So in our case, as you know, we have a long history as well on sustainability, participating in different international initiatives, in capital markets, and we are a major part of some sustainability index worldwide. And the 2 main lessons we learned in this journey is first that sustainability is not a well-known concept. So we have a real gap of understanding about what does it mean, how to integrate this in our companies. So, and this is something we should pay attention to and deep dive for sure in the future. And the second lesson is that sustainability is something very related to transparency. We do not understand a sustainable company without transparency, because in order to transition, in order to move forward, it's important cooperation, it's important data, and it's important to understand the real risk, as it was mentioned before, and the real impacts on the strategy and activities. So based on these two major lessons, I can say that the result of your report means that we must continue working hard about how to integrate those findings, those risks into the disclosure, the regular disclosure of the companies, because disclosure is a key aspect of the whole a strategic program of any major company, because it is required by in order to take our decision, and also in order to the investors to take informed decision as well. And additionally, without data and disclosure, it's impossible to align your portfolios. It's impossible to manage your risk. It's impossible at the end to assess your performance and risk. Banks are singular companies. As you know, in this case, we are not the problem. We are not part of the problem because as a services company, our direct impact is very small. We just have the use of our premises, the energy we use then, and we have the energy for transportation of our employees. That's all. But it's important to say that our role here is critical in order to support the transition. We have a major role as because we finance the productive activities, and we also can influence the day-to-day regulatory work. So this is what we are doing. We are trying to support our clients to transition. I fully agree with the previous mentions on SMEs and supply chain. This is not just about big corporates and listed companies. We should not conduct the disclosure in just a pure accounting, just a pure accounting work, because sustainability data it should be required to any company, because everybody should transition, individual families, small companies, and big corporate. It is required. Big corporate, they need to assess the supply chain, and data is critical for that. So we are working pretty hard. For small clients, we learn from the digitization of our operation, and when provide then digital tools to assess, to self-assess the impacts and the disclosure, at least some major KPIs. So a strong commitment with our clients. It's important to share with them comparable options, best practices, and so on. But at the same time, we are working internally to integrate sustainability as a major part of the whole strategy, as I mentioned. Recently, we published two main documents into the market. The first one was the sustainability general policy of our board of directors, a commitment from the board with details about what we want to do, how can we impact as a financial institutions, and how we are going to organize ourselves to achieve that. And secondly, we published the Tcfd report. It was the first one. To be honest, it was a major effort from the whole organization to define governance strategies, risk, and metrics. But we are very proud to share this with the market, and I feel we are happy to see more players with this format, with any other format, to publish the data, and in particular, the progress towards sustainability. So this is our view. This will require a major understanding of the risk. We need data for that. This is about to support our clients. It's not just for internal uses, in particular in the case of financial institutions, because our impact is simple and small, but we recognize a major part of the solution, and we want to participate very actively in that, and with a clear commitment with the market, and with regular participation in the different frameworks and announcements in the future, because we consider financial institutions are a key player in this journey to sustainability.
Thank you, Ricardo. Now, my follow-up question to you will be, what is it? What will be one thing that you would, one message you would like to send to the European Commission? But please limit it to just one sentence. We're really running behind the time. Just 20 seconds, if I may ask. If you would pick just one.
Well, to be honest, what I have in my mind is two challenges regarding the new disclosure projects in the EU. One is about how to find the right balance between regions and countries and a common standard in the EU in order to make results comparable. And the second idea I have in my mind is about, let's say that the non-financial reporting directive and the non-financial framework should be a purpose framework. So this is something to be considered much more seriously. The reporting and disclosure should help our clients transition. So this is not about just the big corporates. It's not about
Ricardo, we really had just 20 seconds. I'm sorry. I just need to move on.
So I mean, it should be integrate everybody. Yeah.
I understand and think about the cross-regional analysis. Thank you very much.
No, pleasure.
Elena, over to you. We'll run probably 5 minutes behind. We'll wrap up in 5 minutes. If you can guide us quickly through your plans at DG FISMA and the European Commission, so people have a proper context, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. So basically, from the Commission side, in the context of the NFRD revision, as you know, we are planning a proposal to be adopted by Q1 next year, probably by the end of the quarter, so by the end of March. And in this context, and in order to overcome some of the problems identified that you've been discussing and presenting during this afternoon, we are looking into, I would say, 3-4 major areas. You could deduct which ones are they from the open public consultation passed over the past months this year. The first one would be the need to broaden the scope of the NFRD requirements in order to bring in more companies that are currently not subject to any reporting obligation. So in this sense, we are considering to what extent should this scope be broadened. And as Ricardo was mentioning, the need not to leave anyone behind is important, but it's also a bit tricky because, of course, we need to keep this proportionality principle in mind. And at the same time, we also do not want to leave, for example, SMEs out of the whole transition. So this links to the second point, which is the issue of standards. Do we need more standardized information? Our belief is that all the problems that we've identified in terms of comparability of the information, the lack of relevant information, the lack of even reliable information cannot be properly addressed if this information is not reported in a standardized manner. Even the issue of accessibility to this information and usability of the information in terms of digitalization, basically, this cannot be addressed either if we don't have a starting point that is standardized information. So in this context, we believe that it would be very difficult to resolve all the problems identified without these standards. And I'm linking this to the issue of scope when I was talking about SMEs, because it's in this context that we are looking into the need for a simplified set of standards for SMEs that could be voluntarily applied and that could help everyone participate in the provision of non-financial information, so that no one is excluded from the different activities, or from the access to capital, or just from being in supply chains of larger companies. So I've already covered scope, digitalization, standardization, and maybe the last one would be audit, and the need to require an audit requirement on companies under the NFRD so that this information is more reliable. We are looking into this as well. And as you know, there are different levels of assurance engagement that could be required, either a limited assurance engagement or a reasonable assurance engagement. And of course, we are considering the different impacts, both positive and negatives, for different actors and stakeholders affected that each approach could have. And we'll consider if this is in the end needed. On the aspect of standardization, as I've mentioned, it relates to different problems. So not only to the comparability, but also to allow the digitalization, and also even to allow the audit of the reports. And in this context, as you also may know, EFRAG is already working in doing some preparatory work in the field of standard setting, so that if the decision is adopted that we do need standards, this work can start relatively quickly and can be as advanced as possible. If we want a first reporting cycle according to detailed requirements, according to our revised NFRD, to be soon enough, we really need these standards to be ready as soon as possible, so that the legal requirements can kick in basically automatically, and we don't have to wait for these standards to be developed. So basically, this technical work has already started, again, under the condition that we don't know if this will be in the end the decision of the College of Commissioners and even of co-legislators. But just in case, and as a calculated risk, this work has already started, and the task force in EFRAG that has worked on this and that is working on this has already published a progress report to indicate their thinking in this area. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Elena, and good luck with the work. Let's see what the co-legislator and the College of the Commissioners will think. But certainly big changes are coming with the Board of Non-Financial Reporting, and most importantly, to sustainable finance, because the amount of the finances that are starting to shift are really beyond imagination, even of the biggest companies, I suppose. And so this is a major thing, both in terms of risks and opportunities. Thank you very much. We'll send a follow-up information. We'll be in touch. Expect more from us. Thank you very much. Goodbye.